everyone, and welcome to Quilt Stories. Susan Shie has been creating the most incredible quilts for many, many years, and we're going to talk about her latest one now. And it's just such a joy to see her again. We met in 2010 at Birmingham Festival of Quilts, where she had an exhibition, and she also had her first box of tarot cards. And she very graciously gave me a box, and I actually have a lovely little message in there. We went out for dinner and had shepherd's pie. And so this is a collector's item as far as I'm concerned. This is just a lovely treat that I have from Susan. And so Susan's in Ohio. And so welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just so grateful that you had me come.
Oh, this is going to be so interesting. The quilt that you have behind you is the one we're going to be talking about. It's 7 of paring knives in the kitchen tarot. Now, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you use the tarot when you're deciding on your quilts?
Yes. Well, now I'm nearly at the end of the 78 cards. Originally, there's 78, and I think I have maybe 10 or 12 to go. So it's the point now where I don't just draw one out of the deck. And there was a middle point where I would draw one of a specific suit, but now I have like 3 left of each of the suits or less. So I have to wait till I shuffle and pull one of those 3 cards out of the suit I've chosen. So it's getting more specific. But at first it was very idealistic of just shuffling the cards and picking one.
It's a great way to work. It's because it sort of gives you that sort of foundation to start with. So here is the quilt, and the quilt is called
Annie and John. It's the 7 of paring knives, which are swords in a regular deck, in the kitchen tarot, which is my deck.
This may be a new technique or way of working for many of you. You may not know Susan's work, but we're going to go through the process that she goes to create these incredible works of art. And yes, every little bit of writing there is written by Susan's hand. So here is a starting point. These are just some sketches that you did. And would you just like to quickly tell me about who Annie and John were?
Well, Annie Glenn was the wife of John Glenn, who was the first astronaut to orbit the Earth from America. And he also became a US Senator from my state, Ohio. And she died of coronavirus at age 100 in May. And John Prine, the guy with the guitar, is a folk singer who's incredibly well known. And my husband and I really love his work. And he went to Spain on tour and acquired coronavirus and came home, and he died at 73 in April. Annie was 100. When I decided that I didn't want to have the task of explaining the whole pandemic, I decided to zero in on a couple of people. And so I chose the 2 of them because they're people that I really know about, and think are very important people in our culture.
So this is the first step in your process, just some rough sketches. This is you working with your famous airbrush.
Yes, it's an Aztec double action airbrush. It's ugly, it's gray plastic, and it's extremely easy to use and ergonomic, and you can really fine tune with it because it's double action, so you can adjust the air versus the paint. I don't look at those sketches when I'm drawing on the wall, because I found out very right away that if you look at a sketch and you're trying to draw in a fluid way, you ruin the big drawing by trying to copy. It's much better, even if the forms don't come out exactly the way you wanted to, because they won't. but what you get is you get a spontaneous freehand work, and that's much more important to me than the accuracy of the connection to the sketch.
Do you always work in this size?
No, this is small for me. For a long time, I was working this height, which is about 60 inches, but I was making a much wider piece. So I was going by the width of my cloth, which is just under 60 inches, and then adding a border to it. But I was making some that were 90 inches wide and more. I broke both of my arms over the last few years. The last one was in fall of 2018. And I decided finally that I would switch to a smaller format. Between the broken arms and the fact that I teach full time online, and I don't have the time I used to have. I used to only teach when someone came to my house for a turtle art camp or when I went somewhere to teach. But now I'm teaching virtually around the clock. So smaller quilts help me get the idea out and the topic covered without having to take so long to make it.
You stand the whole time you're creating?
Well, when I'm painting,
Yeah.
when I'm drawing, this is drawing with paint. This is the first step, and then you take it down and you heat set it, and then you come back and with the airbrush again, I color it. I think we'll see some pictures of that. But
Yes.
once it's no longer airbrush work, then I can sit down.
Right.
So, and this goes much more quickly than the writing does. This is the most exciting part to me is getting that piece up there. And sometimes I have the conceptual glass of wine to give myself give myself the nerve to get into it, because starting it is always the trickiest part. Like
It
if you
is.
make the first shape bigger than you thought, then you can get less of your composition in. And if your first image is smaller than you thought, you get to improvise more composition around it. So that's kind of a critical point.
There is a very strong story behind this quilt. And if you go to the information or description box down below, there'll be a link to the full dated story, which is really fascinating. So we're not going to go into detail about some of the aspects that Susie's been writing about, but all the information will be there for you, and also the information about her classes online, which I think are very, very popular. This is your studio?
This is the painting studio. My husband Jimmy and I share it. On the right side, you'll see a kind of a black looking box up on the wall above the table there. And that is a big exhaust fan. So my husband is a leather artist, and he uses airbrush to dye his leather, not to paint his forms on the leather, but to dye it. So he works in here and I work in here for my work. And I make him put up paper on the wall before he dyes his leather, because his dyes would rot the fabric that's behind here. They're a different kind of alcohol-based dye.
Oh,
And
right.
they're very few. We both wear respirators when we work, and we always have that exhaust fan on. So this is not at my studio. My studio is the next room over, and Jimmy's studio is on the other side of this room.
I noticed there's a little Statue of Liberty piece to the right. And
Yes.
that is for the Sacre auction.
Yes, I started these two at the same time. And you'll see the little statue, it's the 12-inch square. You'll see that develop with the colors along with this one.
Yes, I saw the finished one as well, and I know it went at the auction for a very high price. So on behalf of Sacre, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a real thrill to see it go on the first day, that Diamond Day.
A bit of color has started happening here.
Yes, so you're using the same instrument. This is still the airbrush. And you know, just like with a spray can, the line turns into a spray as you back away from the piece. But you don't want to back away too far, because you don't want the paint all through the air. I use a lot of water with my colors, so the hard part is when I'm putting on the black lines, it has to be a little thicker paint so it looks black instead of gray. But once I get to the colors, I very seldom have a clog, and it just becomes so joyful. And when the airbrush is running well, I feel like my index finger, which is running the trigger or the lever on the airbrush, it's like I point with my finger and this stuff comes out on the wall magically from my mind to the wall.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
So yeah, it just feels great. As long as it's not clogging, you're having a great day when you're airbrushing.
Yes, it must be horrible to have something that's so major to be a temperamental little thing.
It is, if I'm, like I said, with black paint, if I don't get it mixed just perfectly, it clogs on me or it's too gray. So I have to adjust.
Okay.
And when it's working really well and I'm drawing with that black line, it's heaven.
I bet, because it's coming from your brain and going straight onto the fabric, which is wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And every once in a while, I'll go over and peek at the sketch just to see what else I had in there. I see the sketches like the screenplay, like
Yeah.
the setup for a screenplay. It'll tell me what the set is and what the emotions are, what the movements are, you know, what people are doing and how they're feeling. And I've got that figured out, and that's all I need to know.
So here we have a little bit of writing, but not a lot, just basically the titles.
That title became not the title, because after I did that, I noticed a lot of people were using the parody of Love in the Time of Cholera was
Yeah.
being changed to whatever you wanted. And in this case, it was Corona. And a bunch of people did that. So I thought, well, that title is no longer exciting. And that's when I changed it to Annie and John. And
But
you see that there's a spaceship above John's head, and there's rays coming down. Believe me, that's a spaceship. The spaceship is to show how bizarre this pandemic is to live in. It's like we've gone to an alien planet almost.
I
And it's so
agree.
difficult. Yeah, I tried to think of what would be a good symbol for that, and I settled on a UFO. And the Statue of Liberty has a mask on, and that I wasn't the first one to think of that. I thought of it, and I checked Google, and a whole bunch of artists had already done masks back then. But I thought, I don't care, I still want it because we're all, if we have any sense, we're all masked up all over the world.
And Annie's holding her husband.
Yeah, she is, because they grew up together from the time she was 3 and he was 1.5, when their parents met at a card group that met weekly, and they'd put these 2 little kids in a playpen together. And so they grew up and went to school together, and then they were boyfriend and girlfriend in high school, and then they went to college together, and then they got married.
Wow.
So it's an incredible love story. And I heard people say, the governor of Ohio commenting about her death, and he said that without Annie Glenn, there would have been no John Glenn. And she was that strong person behind the throne, so to speak. She had a speech impediment, and when he was an astronaut, they all wanted to interview her because she looked kind of like Jackie Kennedy. She was very beautiful, and she didn't want to talk. And later, when he was a senator, she got therapy and got over her stutter. And then she started foundations to help people who had that problem, and became a national figure in that area. So this is an apron I threw in because on June 19th, we had a rally of Black Lives Matter downtown, and I decided to put this up. And while I was coloring on my quilt, I would airbrush on this at the same time. On the right side here, you'll see it nearly done. And I wore it that way. I think I took the time to use markers, and I wrote on the bodies of these angels. I wrote a bunch of things on there yet in smaller print. But I've been making protest aprons for several years now. They make good protest signs that you don't have to hold up.
That's true. And
They
your
go
arms are up all the time.
They go down below my knees, so they're a big sign. This was the day that Joe Biden, who had been chosen as the candidate for the Democratic Party, picked his running mate, Kamala Harris. And I ran over and wrote this on my piece right near the bottom, just above the subtitle for the quilt, the 7 of paring knives in the kitchen to row. I wrote a little bit about her.
And these smaller texts are with the pens, not the airbrush.
These are Posca Markers. They're a paint marker. And I was turned on to them by Susie Monday, who, when I was teaching a class for her down in Austin, and she had just gotten the set and she let me borrow them, and I couldn't believe how well they work. They don't have any smell to them. That's really important to me. You don't have to wear a respirator. And I've heard them described as opaque inks, but I really think they're acrylic paint, and they have a ball inside of them like a paint marker does. And you don't have to put them in a plastic bag when you're not using them, because sometimes you have to put them in a bag or they dry up, but not these. They're just very expensive, but they're really worth it, because for me to get this small of a line, like right above 7 of paring knives, that writing, I can't really do that with my airbrush without having it get messy for people to be able to really read it. And I'm no longer using my air pen, which I used to use, which is nothing like an airbrush, but that's too hard to use after I broke both of my arms. It puts too much stress on my wrists. So the paint marker is really a nice way to go instead. It's just that they go into the landfill when they're empty. The air pen I could refill all the time.
You can't refill the Posca pens.
No, you can't.
That's a shame.
So, but they do last a long time. The thing about them is they're from Japan. They're by Uni. They have a wonderful website that explains everything about them that you can go to.
Here we've got a lot of writing, both with the airbrush and also with the Posca pens. We're not going to go into the detail of specifically about all of them, but what prompts you to do this writing?
At the top, above and around the spaceship and around the Statue of Liberty, I wrote an article I found about if only 1% of the people in the world died of coronavirus, what would be so wrong with that, was the argument. And this person gave some horrific figures of what it would mean for the people who survive, but often they would end up with lifetime problems in different ways. And it gave the statistics of how many people would be affected by those things. By the time you got done reading that, you realized this was 1% of people dying was just the tip of the iceberg. And I just knew a lot of people who were saying, oh, this is a hoax, or this is going to blow over, or we should have herd immunity. And I put this on there for them.
But this is the point where it starts actually turning into a quilt, but very fine batting.
This is where it's just the painting laid over the Fairfield's bamboo and organic cotton batting. And you'll see that the border isn't exactly even because the painting isn't exactly even because I have trouble with my cotton fronts. I think the weaving gets a little warped when they wrap them on rollers.
Oh, okay.
And so if you look at the bottom right corner here, you'll see it's very close to the edge.
Mm,
But the actual piece of batting is squared off.
right.
So that's how I compensate for it and try to make it right is by making the batting straight. And this is just laying on the table, but you'll see soon how I have to have a drop cloth when I actually sandwich it. Yeah, this is it laying on top of the backing and I'm already rolling it up. The backing here is made of Lund Fabrics artisan batiks, which are made in Java. But Deb Lund and Michael Mrufka go there and supervise their factory there. And they taught everybody there to work the way they do. And they use really environmental friendly techniques. They purify the water. They do all kinds of wonderful things. And they have insurance for their employees and the library for their employees with the foundation for book buying or donating. And it's just great. And what I need is backing fabric because it comes around and becomes the border. I need backing fabric that can have writing that people can see on it. So I have to pick a fairly pastel surface and I want pattern on it, but I want it to be low contrast. There's only 3 fabrics there sewn together because I was kind of in a hurry at this point.
Would you like to
And
tell
I'm
us
up,
why you're in a hurry?
because I wanted to enter it in Quilt National. So, so this is where I'm unrolling the part that is the painting and the batting are rolled up together and I'm unrolling them over the backing. And there's a drop cloth underneath the backing panel. Here, you're only seeing the drop cloth behind the thing and you're actually seeing all of the border is tucked in underneath the painting. So I'm bringing the backing
I
panel
see.
up over the batting and I'm tucking it under the painting. And the painting remains raw edged.
Oh, okay. I had missed that. That's interesting.
Corners and stuff, the corners are just like folded this way and then folded that way.
Yeah.
And then at this stage, I've already put straight pins around all of the edge where the painting comes over the border.
Yep.
Because I'm going to take that out first by sewing that first. And then the body of the thing, I'm rolling up as I pin and I'm using the boomerang safety pins to pin them together. And I just keep rolling it up. And here it's just about all safety pin. This is how I quilt. I call it crazy grid. because I don't care if it gets crooked. I don't care if I don't want the rows to be perfectly straight. That's boring to me for my work. It's fine in other people's work. But I usually start quilting in the center of one of the sides at the edge. And I quilt across the center of the quilt to the other edge and tie off. And then I'll pivot the quilt 90 degrees and go to the next side and go to somewhere around the middle. I don't want it to be perfectly the middle, but somewhere near it. And I'll sew all the way across there. And I just keep doing that and turning it. And if it's like this is a rectangle rather than a square. So I have to do more lines on the ones on the long side, obviously. But it gets to the point where when I have all the pins out, I can flip the quilt over and I can see it so much better on the back because I've got that light fabric that's low contrast.
Yep.
I can really, and that's another reason I like those low contrast things. I can't see very well on the bright patterns, strong patterns. So I stay away from those and I can see on the back where I need to sew more lines. And I love it when the lines need to come together and make like a chevron instead of just being a square.
Yeah.
I like how the crooked lines come together. So, and it depends on how good the book is that I'm listening to. I may or may not keep quilting longer because I love to listen to books.
Me too. It's a great way to do it, except I have to wear earphones because I can't hear them over my machine. You can lose yourself.
And you don't want it to stop. You just keep quilting. This is the tablet that the Statue of Liberty is holding, and I haven't written on it yet. But I left some of it open so that I could write more stuff as things came up in a timely way. I didn't want to finishing the quilt and have something wonderful I want to talk about and have no room. But you can see that this is not all the way sewn into the size it ends up. You can see there's lines that are closer together and lines that are farther apart, and that's okay because I like the asynchronicity of it.
Is it hard to write when you've quilted?
It's trickier because you don't want it to pooch up around the marker. It'd be easier to airbrush at that point than to do it with the markers because the airbrush doesn't touch the surface. But I want small lines, so you just have to kind of hold the fabric out with your hand.
Yeah.
And I should say too that I'm heat setting every time I turn around. Every time I do another application of something, not sewing because that doesn't affect it, but I'm heat setting with my iron on dry, hottest heat, with my respirator on. And I'm wearing a 3M 6000 respirator, which has the best filters in it you can get for a respirator, because you don't want any of this stuff to get into your lungs and into your bloodstream. No matter whether you can smell a paint product or not, if you have to heat set it, you're changing its chemistry, and there's things being thrown off as an off gas, even if you can't smell it. So you really want to have good ventilation and wear a respirator when you heat set.
Hmm.
And this is my cat, Daphne.
Who helps you in the studio?
Yes, well, all three of the cats like to do that. There was just one cat in there at the time, and my dog might be under the table. It's hard to tell.
She looks very content, but I hadn't actually noticed about the way that you brought your backing around to the front. It looks really good, doesn't it? It just goes. It's just part of it.
Well, I like it in that I have this fetish for working all the way to the edge when I'm drawing or when I'm painting.
Yep.
And so I don't want to have to think about leaving a border. And there's so many stitching lines, there's nothing's going to ravel out. And then around the very edge of the quilt, I also do a hand stitch, because I made quilts for years that were all hand sewn,
Oh,
but they were smaller than these, and I didn't do near as much writing. So my fingertips went numb in 2005 or 2006, and I had to switch to machine sewing, and it was a real blessing.
yes.
And I still like to do that hand stitch around the edge, though. It's just a running stitch that makes the edge nice and tight with the rest of the quilting.
Mm-hmm.
And I use Laura Wazalowski's Art Fabrics hand-dyed pearl cotton. It's variegated stuff that's just beautiful.
Yes, I love her stuff.
See, it's all written on now.
Yep.
The tablet we looked at before, but there's still more to go. Yeah,
Right.
see their eyes?
Yep.
Yes, I now call them Buddha eyes, and nobody could understand what they were before. That it's like the third eye, which is a Buddhist thing and a Hindu thing too, I think. It's like reaching into your soul, going into your inner self. And then I put one on the throat chakra, which is on your throat. And that's where you communicate. That's the chakra for communicating with each other. So I like the idea of the thoughts going into yourself and then coming out very openly from your soul. And I even give it to people I don't like. There's a few people I don't really like, but I figure we have to help them all try to become more harmonious in the world. So you can see the trunks of these trees are the paring knives, and the actual deck of regular tarot cards, it has swords for this suit, but swords are a weapon, and my paring knives are kitchen implements, which are in keeping with my kitchen deck, but also imply that you're helping other people rather than hurting them. And that's important to me. I have this thing that I started doing in 2006 where I had to cover something, and I made a little peace symbol to go over it. Then I made a whole bunch of little peace symbols, and I started putting one on each one of my quilts, and I call them peace cozies because they started out covering something. And each one of them is a number. This is number 83 since 2005. And the rules I have for myself is I cannot plan where this is going to go. And I don't want to put it over something that has writing on it. And then it has to make sense where it's going to go.
Wow.
So on this, I had to think and think for a while. And I finally decided to put it on the Statue of Liberty's flame on her torch, because that way I thought it would radiate out to the world, this symbol of peace. And that made a lot of sense for me, because even if you're not political, even if it's just coronavirus you're thinking about, we need a lot of peace, we need a lot of comfort, and we need to give it to each other as much as we can. One of the last things I wrote on here before the border, I was looking at the hair on John and Annie, and I thought it's kind of boring. They just have this brown hair, and not that brown hair is boring, but any head of hair with no writing on it on my quilt is boring. So I thought I'm going to have to use a white marker and go over this brown. And I thought, okay, what's my favorite John Prine song? And I thought of Angel from Montgomery. And I got to thinking about lines from that. And then I thought, oh man, I thought about John Lewis, who was a civil rights champion in the 50s and 60s especially, and also became a congressman and just died this summer. He did not die of coronavirus, but he died of cancer. And then I thought, he was born in a little town, or outside of a little town. His parents were sharecroppers, and he was born in a little town outside of Montgomery, Alabama. And I never could understand what the song Angel from Montgomery was about. And I decided that for me, just now in this time, this song is about John Lewis, because he was such an angel. He just wanted so much for everyone to get along and be fair to each other. And so I wrote the lines in their hair about him. And then I decided I would put his letter, but I kind of wished at this point that I had named the thing Annie and John and John. And then I thought, no, that's a little goony. We'll just leave that alone. So maybe the John that I have in there can stand for both of them. Oh, there's John. This is a drawing that I made after he died this summer. He was working as a congressman up until he died. But this is a drawing I made in honor of the Freedom Rides, that he was the main person who did them back it was 1961, all through that year. There was a problem that there was an interstate law that you could not have buses and trains be segregated. If your bus or train went through more than one state, you had to be integrated. And the southern states were being allowed to ignore that rule. So they decided, this is Martin Luther King and different people were working on this, but John Lewis was the one who went out in the field. And they had, I think, 13 or 12 people on the first Freedom Ride. And they all went from Washington, D.C. down to New Orleans, stopping along the way in different places. And so I made a conglomerate of different people from different pictures that I found. I like to make haikus on my drawings, and there's a haiku on the quilt too. But this haiku is made of the first three signs. If you start at the left, it's the first line, and then the second sign is the second line of the haiku, and the third line is the third line of the haiku. I'm absolutely obsessed with haikus right now. And on John Lewis is a discussion that he had. It was very political, so we'll leave it alone.
Okay.
This is part of, somebody wants to go back and hold that, they can, and they can read it. It's pretty legible. So this is the writing that I did on the border edge. And this is the side where it's actually is pretty big writing compared to, it got smaller and smaller as I went around the quilt and realized this is such a long letter. John Lewis wrote a letter to the New York Times, and he sent it to them right before he died. And he asked them if they would please publish it on the day of his funeral. So not only did they publish it, but a bunch of newspapers around the world did. So I decided that instead of using my airbrush and using big lettering to go around this edge quickly on September 9th, which was the last day you could enter Quilt National, I decided to write this letter on the border with markers. And it took me hours, and the clock is ticking. And I finally ran out of space. And I decided that if you got that far in reading it, you could go ahead and Google that letter. I would just John Lewis op-ed letter to New York Times, published July 30th, 2020, and you'd find it. And it's all over the internet. It's such a beautiful, beautiful statement. Basically, he's trying to give advice to people about how to get along with each other and how to have racial connectivity and harmony. Right. And it's one of the best things that anybody's ever written about that, as far as I'm concerned. I did get the Quilt National entry in with 20 minutes to spare before they closed it, and it got into Quilt National 21. So I'm really excited about that. But here you can see the border. You can see all the border writing that up until then wasn't there. Yes. The last thing I did.
It's an amazing piece, like all of your pieces. They just beg you to come up and look closely at them and read. And I'm sure that people will really enjoy looking at the other photos. Susie's done a link.
It's a Facebook album, but there's two of them. There's one of making this piece, and there's one of images of the finished piece, but they're public. So you don't have to be on Facebook to be able to see it.
There's links to these in the description box. I'm sure many of you will really enjoy going in and looking at all the posts, because it's basically what Susie's done every day to create this quilt. I'm so thrilled you got into Quilt National with it. So it'll be preserved for posterity in their collection of images and things. You've got into Quilt National quite a few times, haven't you?
This is my 14th time.
Very.
I didn't get the last two, and I don't expect to get into every one of them. I think there's 4 or 5 times I haven't gotten in. So but with 2 in a row where I didn't get in, I almost didn't enter this time. And then finally I decided I'm going to be able to finish this just in time for it. I should do it. So that's when I made the run for it.
Within 20 minutes. That's fairly impressive.
It's my cat, Daphne. I had a dear friend named Daphne Page who died. This is her namesake. And she had a brother named Arlo.
Susie, that was really quite amazing. I'm going to go back and look at the details of your quilt. There's just everywhere you look, there's just something interesting. And also having your sort of basically a diary of your piece is so useful. And I know you do that for most of your quilts, don't you?
I know that there's going to be people who look at the quilt and don't pay any attention to the writing. And so the writing has to function as a surface texture.
Mm-hmm.
And the quilt has to hold up without the writing, in my mind, because I know there's people who look at them and go, oh no, I will not read all that. And then there's someone else on the other end of the stick who will come back and read every bit of it. So you just never know. So you have to be careful not to say anything you wouldn't want to be read, you know.
Yes.
Because someone's going to read it all, someone else is going to read none of it, and there's everything in between. I think it was kind of a blessing to have me and the air pen kind of part ways,
Mm-hmm.
because the air pen gave me very, very uniform writing, was very small, and I had trouble reading it, but I didn't realize other people did too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this writing is not that small. So I think I've gotten a compromise, and I started this piece to be for a show called Quarantine Quilts that Sandra Sider was inviting people to enter. And I just didn't get it done in time because of teaching.
I was successful
in
getting into that book.
With
So.
the Quarantine Quilts?
Yes. Yeah.
Is out already?
No, not yet. Not yet. But
Okay, but
I
I'm
was
so
thrilled.
happy. That's great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. She's such a good, excellent writer too, an editor.
Indeed.
She's wonderful. I had a solo show down at the Texas Quilt Museum, and she's the curator there also.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just wonderful to work with. I have a question.
Yes.
Are you going to archive these somewhere besides on YouTube? I just think that'd be lovely.
Yes, somebody somebody wrote last week and said that it's wonderful to have this documentation happening. And then somebody the next day must have read that comment and said the same thing. You never know. This started out as a just something to keep me happy and busy in time of COVID, and over 30 videos now, and I don't plan to stop in the near future. So
that's great.
It's been great.
I make videos for my classes, and I have 72 now over 6 years. I appreciate what it takes to make a movie.
It's fun.
I really do.
It's fun.
Well, my class is called Lucky Drawing because my nickname is Lucky. And it's a freehand drawing class. And the intention of the whole thing is to get everybody to realize that you can draw just fine because you could when you were little, before you found out about the art rules and before people told you your work wasn't right. And the whole thing is about letting go and letting your ideas and your energy flow out with the work, and just let it flow and not judge it. But it's so hard for all of us, including me. It's hard for everybody to do that. So I teach a 30-day class, and it's online on Facebook.
I'm also doing my online classes as well, on-demand classes. I'm hoping people will be interested in those as well. Thank you very much for giving us your time today. It's been amazing. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everybody else has. And I'm hoping that if you have enjoyed this talk, that you will consider subscribing to my channel. There's a link down below, and please click it and give the thumbs up. And I'd love your comments as well. I'm getting some really lovely comments on my videos. It's just been very, very heartwarming. And so I'm encouraged to continue meeting wonderful people. And so I'd like to thank you very much, Susie. And I'm sure this interview will inspire a lot more people to go onto your website with the links below. The time's come to say goodbye, and it's been great catching up. I can't believe it's been 10 years since we actually shared time together. Doesn't time just goes like...
Thank you so much for having me. I just have enjoyed this so much, Lisa, and you're wonderful. You're doing great work, and I'm very proud to be one of the people you asked to do it. Thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.